I'm Dawn, 27, female. I live in a quiet suburban town, in a small apartment that I'm proud to have secured on my own. As a mortgage loan officer, my life revolves around numbers, documents, and the tangible dream of homeownership. It's a stable, predictable life, one that I built brick by brick after a childhood that was anything but. This entire mess started because the one person who gave me that stability, my grandfather, passed away, leaving behind a legacy that my aunt and cousin decided was theirs for the taking. They thought a bit of paperwork and public humiliation would be enough to make me disappear. They were wrong. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My grandfather, Arthur, was a man carved from oak. He was sturdy, quiet, and deeply principled. While my mother, his daughter, had passed away when I was young, he stepped in, providing a buffer against the more volatile members of our family, namely his other daughter, my Aunt Karen, and her daughter, my cousin Chloe. He wasn't a wealthy man in terms of cash, but he owned his home outright, a beautiful two-story colonial on a double lot, the only real asset to his name. It was the house he'd built with my grandmother, the house my mother grew up in, and the house where I spent every summer. He had always been clear about his intentions. Dawn, he'd say, sitting on the porch swing, this house is your mother's legacy. It's for you. Karen has her own life, a husband with money. You deserve a foundation. He'd made me the sole executor of his will, and the sole beneficiary of the property. He knew his other daughter. He knew that if he split it, Karen would find a way to take it all. This was his way of protecting me, even after he was gone. The reading of the will was tense. It took place in a stuffy lawyer's office just 2 weeks after the funeral. I sat on one side of the mahogany table, and Karen and Chloe sat on the other, dressed in expensive, somber clothing that looked more performative than genuine. Chloe, my cousin, was busy scrolling through her phone, probably updating her followers on her devastating loss with a perfectly crafted selfie. Karen stared at me with undisguised contempt. When the lawyer, a man my grandfather had trusted for 40 years, read the clause about the house, the atmosphere curdled. To my granddaughter, Dawn, I bequeath my property at 123 Maple Lane, its contents, and the land it occupies in its entirety. Karen's gasp was sharp and theatrical. That's impossible. Dad would never do that. He loved Chloe just as much. The lawyer, Mr. Hemlock, simply adjusted his glasses. The will is quite clear, Karen. It was signed, witnessed, and notarized. Arthur was of sound mind. Chloe finally looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed in a practiced expression of hurt. But Grandpa promised me I could use the garden for my photo shoots, he promised. I stayed silent. There was no point in arguing. My grandfather had warned me this would happen. He'd left a small cash account to be split between them, a token gesture, but the house, the foundation, was mine. They collected their check and stormed out of the office without another word. I thought naively that this was the end of it. I thought the legal document, the final word of the man we were all supposed to respect, would be enough. But for people like Karen and Chloe, laws and final wishes are just obstacles to be bulldozed. They saw the house not as a home or a legacy, but as a prize, and they had just lost. Their retaliation would be swift, ugly, and very, very public. The legal battle they initiated was not just about a house. It was about erasing me from the family picture entirely, and they were willing to burn everything to the ground to do it, starting with my grandfather's memory. Aunt Karen and Chloe didn't waste any time. Less than a month after the will reading, I was served with a notice. They were contesting the will, claiming undue influence. Their argument was as absurd as it was insulting, that I, a struggling loan officer, had somehow manipulated my grandfather, a stubborn and sharp-witted man, into signing over his only asset. They painted me as a predator and themselves as the grieving, cheated victims. Their campaign wasn't limited to the courts. Chloe, with her modest but vicious online following, began a subtle smear campaign. She posted old, unflattering photos of me, captioning them with vague but pointed remarks about users and people who take advantage of the elderly. She never used my name, but everyone in our small town knew who she was talking about. My aunt, leveraging her role as a part-time real estate agent, started spreading rumors among the community that I was planning to sell the house to a developer to build condos, a lie designed to turn the neighbors against me. The legal process was a slow, grinding misery. We were required to attend a preliminary hearing, a formality to set dates and review initial arguments. I took the morning off work, dressed in my most professional suit, and walked up the steps of the county courthouse with a knot in my stomach. And that's where they were waiting for me. Karen and Chloe stood there, positioned like sentinels at the top of the wide stone stairs. Chloe was filming on her phone, a smirk on her face. Karen's expression was pure venom. "There she is," Karen announced loudly to the few people milling about, "the little thief who tricked a dying man." I tried to walk past them, my head held high, my gaze fixed on the heavy wooden doors of the courthouse. "Aunt Karen, this is not the place. Don't you call me that," she hissed, stepping in front of me, blocking my path. "You lost that right when you decided to steal from your own family." Chloe moved closer, her phone now inches from my face. "Say something for my followers," she taunted. "Tell them how it feels to be a parasite." My composure started to crack. "This is ridiculous. Get out of my way." I tried to sidestep them, but Chloe shoved her shoulder into mine. I stumbled back, catching my balance on the railing. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a mix of fear and fury. I looked at Chloe, at her smug, entitled face, and I saw a lifetime of petty cruelties, of being made to feel small and unworthy. "You have no shame," I said, my voice shaking. "Grandpa wanted me to have the house. He knew you'd do this." That's when Chloe's smirk vanished, her face twisted into a mask of rage. "He was a confused old man who you poisoned against us. You're a filthy animal, clawing for scraps that aren't yours." And then it happened. With a sharp, explosive movement, she slapped me. Her hand cracked across my cheek, the force of it snapping my head to the side. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet morning air. For a moment, there was just a stunned silence. The side of my face throbbed with a hot, stinging pain. I could feel the gazes of strangers on me, their pity and curiosity a fresh layer of humiliation. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Karen's voice, dripping with false concern. "Oh, Chloe, darling, you shouldn't have. She's not worth it." But her eyes were gleaming with triumph. Chloe lowered her hand, a look of shocked satisfaction on her face, as if she couldn't believe she'd actually done it. I stood there, frozen on those courthouse steps, the sting on my cheek a searing brand of their contempt. They hadn't just attacked me, they had desecrated the memory of my grandfather in the one place I thought rules and decency mattered. They believed they had already won, that this public shaming would break me. But as I touched my tender cheek, something inside me shifted. The hurt and shame began to cool, hardening into something else, something cold and solid. It was resolve. They wanted a fight. They had no idea I was the one who was about to bring the gavel down. The slap echoed in my mind for days. It wasn't just the physical sting. It was the sheer audacity, the public declaration that they saw me as nothing. At work, I went through the motions, processing loan applications, checking credit scores, but my focus was gone. The legal battle felt like a distant, abstract thing, but that moment on the steps was real and visceral. They had made it personal. My company had a policy offering a few free sessions with a legal consultant for personal matters. I thought about using it to ask about assault charges, but I knew that would just devolve into a messy, he said, she said drama that they would thrive on. Instead, I decided to use the resource for the actual case. That's how I met Mark, a senior underwriter who had a law degree he rarely used. He was sharp, pragmatic, and had a no-nonsense attitude that I immediately appreciated. Contesting a will on undue influence is notoriously hard to prove. Mark explained, leaning back in his chair after I laid out the situation. "They need to provide concrete evidence that you coerced him, that he wasn't of sound mind. Do they have anything?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "Just their own greed. My grandfather was sharp as a tack until the very end. Then their lawyer knows it's a weak case. They're not trying to win in court," Mark mused, tapping a pen on his desk. "They're trying to break you, force you into a settlement out of sheer exhaustion and legal fees. It's a war of attrition." He was right, and I was already feeling the drain. That evening, defeated, I went to my grandfather's house. I was legally allowed access, though Karen had made it clear I was not welcome. I walked through the quiet rooms, running my hand over his favorite armchair, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco still lingering in the fabric. I felt lost. How could I fight this? I ended up in his study, a small room lined with bookshelves filled with history books and old encyclopedias. He was a meticulous record keeper. I started opening drawers, not sure what I was looking for. There were old tax returns, appliance warranties, photo albums. In the bottom drawer of his big oak desk, beneath a stack of old maps, I found a small, locked metal box. I recognized it immediately. It was his important papers box. I had no idea where the key was. Frustrated, I jiggled the lock, and to my surprise, it popped open. The latch had been broken for years. Inside, nestled among his military service medals and my parents' wedding certificate, was a thick manila envelope. My name was written on the front in his familiar, shaky cursive. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a letter. It was a collection of documents. The first was a copy of a cashier's check for $50,000, dated 7 years ago. The check was made out to my Aunt Karen. Stapled to it was a handwritten note from my grandfather. It read, "For Karen's down payment. This is your mother's share, paid in advance, so there are no misunderstandings later. You have received your inheritance from me. Consider us settled." My breath caught in my throat. He had already given her a massive sum of money, explicitly stating it was her inheritance. Below that was another document, a notarized letter signed by both my grandfather and Aunt Karen, acknowledging the receipt of the $50,000 as a full and final advance on any future inheritance from his estate. She had signed it. She had legally acknowledged that she had already received her share, and there was more. He had kept records of every major loan he'd given her and Chloe over the years. Money for a car, for a business venture for Chloe that never materialized, for a vacation. The total was staggering. He had documented their financial dependence and his generosity with the precision of an accountant. He had known, even then, what they were capable of. He knew they would one day try to claim more than they were owed, and he had left me the ammunition to stop them. This wasn't just a box of papers. It was a secret, a perfectly preserved record of their hypocrisy. They were suing me for a house, claiming I had stolen their legacy, when in fact they had been draining my grandfather dry for years and had already signed away their rights to any further claim. The shame and fear I'd been feeling evaporated, replaced by a surge of cold, clarifying anger. This was no longer just about defending myself. It was about exposing them. My grandfather had left me a foundation, but he had also left me a weapon. And as a mortgage loan officer who lived and breathed financial documentation, I knew exactly how to use it. Armed with the contents of the lockbox, my entire perspective shifted. I wasn't a victim anymore, I was an investigator. The next morning, I walked into Mark's office, laid the notarized letter and the copy of the check on his desk, and watched his eyes widen as he read them. "Well, I'll be," he said, letting out a low whistle. "This is a smoking gun, Dawn. This document, signed by your aunt, completely invalidates her claim to the estate. She legally agreed to this, I know," I said, my voice steady. "But I don't think it's enough. They'll just claim Grandpa forced her to sign it, or that she didn't understand what it meant. They'll lie. I want to build a case so airtight that they can't wriggle out of it." Mark leaned forward, a glint in his eye. "So what's the plan? You're a loan officer. You follow paper trails for a living. Let's follow this one." That's exactly what I intended to do. My job had trained me to be meticulous, to see the story behind the numbers. I spent the next several weeks of my life in a deep dive, using every spare moment to piece together the financial puzzle of Aunt Karen and Chloe. It started with the $50,000 check. The note said it was for a down payment. As a part-time real estate agent, Karen's property records were semi-public. A little digging in the county registrar's database confirmed it. She and her husband had purchased their current home 7 years ago, and their down payment was exactly $50,000. Check 1. Next, I looked at the loans my grandfather had documented. They were just handwritten notes, not legally binding, but they gave me dates and amounts. I cross-referenced these with Chloe's social media. A note for $5,000 dated in May 3 years ago for a business startup coincided perfectly with Chloe's launch of her influencer brand, complete with a professional photo shoot and website. Another $10,000 for car trouble matched the week she posted a picture of her brand, new convertible. She wasn't just taking money, she was flaunting the lifestyle it afforded her while claiming to be a self-made entrepreneur. The real breakthrough came from my own professional expertise. My grandfather's house was old, and he'd taken out a small home equity line of credit HELOC about 10 years ago for a new roof. As the executor, I had the right to request all financial statements related to the property. When the bank statements arrived, I sat at my kitchen table and went through them page by page. For the first few years, the activity was normal, small draws for repairs, steady payments. But then, around 5 years ago, the pattern changed. There were regular, significant cash withdrawals, not huge amounts, but a steady drain of $1,000 or $2,000 every few months. This was odd. My grandfather was a frugal man. He didn't spend cash like that. I pulled up the bank's imaging system, and there it was. Signature after signature on the withdrawal slips. Some were my grandfather's, but many were not. They were forged. The handwriting was loopy and imprecise, a poor imitation of his jagged script. But who had access to his account? The Hullock was linked to his main checking account, an account to which he had, in a moment of weakness after a minor health scare, added my Aunt Karen as a co-signer, just for emergencies. This wasn't just a case of them feeling entitled to an inheritance. This was systematic financial abuse. Karen had been slowly siphoning money from his home equity for years, taking cash that he likely never even noticed was missing. She was literally stealing the value out of the very house she was now claiming was her birthright. I reference the dates of the withdrawals with Karen's bank records, which my lawyer was able to subpoena as part of the discovery process for our case. The pattern was undeniable. A $2,000 cash withdrawal from Grandpa's account was often followed a day or two later by a $2,000 cash deposit into Karen's account. It was blatant, arrogant, and incredibly stupid. I compiled everything into a neat, indexed binder. The notarized letter, the property records, Chloe's social media posts aligned with Grandpa's loans, the bank statements, the highlighted forgeries, and Karen's deposit slips. It was a complete narrative of greed, deception, and theft. The slap on the courthouse steps had been their declaration of war. This binder was my declaration of victory. They thought they were fighting a sentimental girl over a house. They were about to find out they were fighting a mortgage loan officer who had just foreclosed on their lies. With the evidence binder complete, my lawyer, Mr. Hemlock, was ecstatic. "This is devastating for their case, Dawn," he said, peering over his glasses at the neatly organized tabs. "The financial abuse claim alone could lead to criminal charges. I don't want her in jail," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "I want them publicly humiliated. I want them to lose everything they tried to take. I want it to be on my terms. Mr. Hemlock nodded slowly, understanding. A strategic reveal then, not in a stuffy preliminary hearing, but somewhere more impactful. My plan began to form, not as a complex legal maneuver, but as a simple, elegant trap. The next step in our legal battle was a mandatory mediation session. It was a final attempt to resolve the dispute before it went to a full, costly trial. This would be my courtroom, but before that, I needed to set the stage. I started with the house. Karen's primary argument for contesting the will was that my grandfather intended for the family home to stay in the family. She'd told neighbors I planned to sell it to developers. So I did the opposite. I hired a local, well-respected contractor, the son of one of my grandfather's oldest friends, to begin minor, visible restoration work on the house. We replaced the porch railings, repainted the shutters, and planted a new garden. I made sure to speak with every neighbor who walked by, telling them my plan was to honor my grandfather by restoring the home to its former glory and living in it myself. The rumors Karen had spread began to die, replaced by whispers of the loving granddaughter preserving her family's legacy. Next, I focused on Chloe. Her entire identity was built on her carefully curated online image of a successful, self-made boss. I hired a freelance researcher to do a deep dive into her business. It turned out her social media management company had only 2 clients, her mother's small real estate operation and a local cupcake shop that had gone out of business 6 months ago. Her income was negligible. Her lifestyle, the car, the clothes, the vacations, was funded almost entirely by the money her mother had been taking from my grandfather. The final piece of my plan involved a detail I'd noticed in my grandfather's original will, a detail so small and seemingly insignificant that I was sure Karen's lawyer had overlooked it. My grandfather was a man of principles, but also of contingencies. Tucked away in the boilerplate language of the will was an interim clause, also known as a no-contest clause. It's a provision that states if any beneficiary contests the will and loses, they forfeit any inheritance they were supposed to receive. In my grandfather's will, he had stipulated that Karen and Chloe were to split the contents of a small investment account, worth about $20,000. It wasn't much, but it was something. By officially contesting the will, they had put that inheritance on the line. If their case was dismissed, they would get nothing at all. This was the fine print. This was the clause that would serve as the lock on my trap. They had come for the entire house, and in their greed, they were about to lose the little they were actually entitled to. The day before the mediation, I visited my grandfather's grave. I stood there in the quiet cemetery, the binder of evidence feeling heavy in my bag. I'm sorry it came to this, I whispered to the cold stone. But I'm going to finish it. I'll protect the foundation you gave me. As I drove away, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in months. I had the facts, I had the evidence, and I had a plan. They had thrown the first punch, a loud, brutish slap in public. My response would be quiet, precise, and utterly devastating. It would be delivered not with an open palm, but with the weight of a judge's gavel, crafted from the paper trail they had so carelessly left behind. The mediation room was about to become their judgment day. The mediation was held in a neutral, soulless conference room at a downtown law firm. A retired judge, a kindly-looking man named Mr. Albright, served as the mediator. I arrived first with Mr. Hemlock. I placed my thick binder on the table with a quiet, solid thud. A few minutes later, Karen and Chloe swept in with their lawyer. They looked confident, almost bored. Chloe was dressed in a ridiculously unprofessional pink blazer, while Karen wore a look of pained martyrdom. They completely ignored my presence. The session began with their lawyer rehashing their claims of undue influence, painting me as a manipulative opportunist and Karen as the devoted daughter protecting her father's true wishes. Chloe sniffled on cue. Karen dabbed at a dry eye with a tissue. It was a pathetic, well-rehearsed performance. Mr. Albright listened patiently, then turned to us. MS Vance, your response. Mr. Hemlock cleared his throat. Mr. Albright, my client is prepared to offer a response. However, she believes it would be more efficient to present it directly to her aunt. He gestured to me. I took a deep breath and looked directly at Karen. Aunt Karen, I began, my voice clear and even. Your entire case is built on the idea that Grandpa wanted you to have a share of his estate, correct? She scoffed, of course. He loved me. He loved my daughter. I see, I said. I opened the binder to the first tab and slid a document across the table. It was the notarized letter she had signed 7 years ago. Can you please identify your signature on this document, acknowledging the receipt of $50,000 as a full and final advance on your inheritance? Her face went pale. Her lawyer snatched the paper and his eyes darted across the text. Chloe leaned over, her brow furrowed in confusion. What is that? That? I said, is a legally binding agreement, but perhaps you were under duress when you signed it. Perhaps you were in a difficult financial position. I then slid across copies of the bank statements, showing the steady withdrawals from my grandfather's hillock. Or perhaps you were simply accustomed to taking what you wanted, like the approximately $40,000 you siphoned from his home equity account over 5 years. I have the withdrawal slips, many with what appear to be forged signatures, and your deposit slips to match. The room was silent. Karen's lawyer looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Karen's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Chloe, however, found her voice. That's not true. My mother wouldn't. We needed that money. Grandpa was helping us. Oh, I know he was helping you. I said, turning to her. I slid over a new set of documents, printouts of her social media posts next to my grandfather's handwritten notes about the loans. Like the $5,000 for your business launch. I pointed to a photo of her posing in a designer dress. Or the $10,000 for your convertible. I showed another picture of her with the car, captioned hard work pays off, your hard work or my grandfather's retirement fund. Chloe shrank back in her chair, her face burning red. She looked at her mother for help, but Karen was staring at the papers, her facade completely shattered. My clients were simply receiving gifts. Their lawyer stammered, trying to regain control. There is no proof of any wrongdoing. Then we will let a court decide, Mr. Hemlock interjected smoothly, and a forensic accountant, and perhaps the district attorney's office on the matter of elder financial abuse and forgery. But before we do, there's one last thing. He slid the final document across the table, a copy of my grandfather's will, with the no contest clause highlighted in yellow, as you know, Mr. Hemlock said calmly, you filed a formal contestation of the will. This clause states that if a beneficiary contests the will and fails, they forfeit their inheritance. Your case is baseless. When the judge dismisses it, which he will, you won't just lose your claim to the house. You will also forfeit the $20,000 that Mr. Vance legally left for you. You will walk away with nothing. He let the words hang in the air, however. He continued, my client is a reasonable woman. She is willing to offer you a deal right here, right now. You will sign a document dropping this lawsuit immediately and permanently. You will also sign a confession of judgment for the $40,000 you improperly took from the hillock. A 10-year repayment plan. In exchange, she will not pursue criminal charges and will not enforce the no contest clause. You get to keep the $20,000, which will cover half of what you owe her. It was a checkmate. They could either accept the deal, walk away with their reputations in tatters but their freedom intact, or they could proceed to court where they would be exposed, lose everything, and face possible jail time. Karen looked at me, her eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost breathtaking. The smug, superior woman from the courthouse steps was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. Chloe was openly crying, not out of remorse, but out of the humiliation of being so thoroughly exposed. Their lawyer leaned over and whispered frantically to them for a few minutes. Finally, he straightened up, his face grim. We accept the terms. I watched them sign the papers, their hands shaking with rage. As they pushed their chairs back to leave, I spoke one last time, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of the entire ordeal. By the way, Chloe, I said, the word for someone who claws for scraps that aren't theirs isn't animal. It's thief. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Then, without another word, they were gone. The gavel had fallen. Justice, served on a platter of their own documents, was final. The aftermath wasn't a loud, triumphant explosion. It was a quiet, profound sense of peace. The lawsuit was officially withdrawn the next day. The cloud that had been hanging over my life for months finally dissipated. I walked back to my grandfather's house, not as a visitor or a defendant, but as its rightful owner. The air inside seemed lighter, the sunlight through the windows brighter. The first repayment check from Karen arrived a month later, a bitter pill she would have to swallow every month for the next 10 years. I set up a separate account for the funds, deciding to use it exclusively for the property taxes and upkeep of the house. A final, ironic twist where the money she stole from the house would now be used to preserve it. Chloe's online presence imploded. Word travels fast in a small town, and the story of the mediation, while officially confidential, leaked in hushed tones and knowing glances. Her brand, built on a lie of self-made success, crumbled overnight. She deleted her accounts a few weeks later. The last I heard, she was working a retail job at the mall, a harsh dose of the reality she had spent years avoiding. I quit my job at the bank. The experience had taught me that my skills in finance and documentation could be used for more than just processing loans. Mark, my mentor from the bank, helped me connect with a nonprofit organization that provides financial literacy counseling and advocacy for the elderly, helping them protect themselves from the exact kind of abuse my grandfather had suffered. My work became meaningful in a way it never had been before. I was no longer just building careers, I was protecting legacies. A few months after everything settled, I moved into my grandfather's house. I spent weeks sorting through his belongings, keeping the things that held memories and donating the rest. I painted the walls, refinished the floors, and slowly, room by room, made it my own. But I kept his study exactly as it was, with the old oak desk and the metal box in the bottom drawer. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in shouting or fighting back with fists, but in quiet preparation, in knowing the facts, and in letting the truth speak for itself. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was sitting on the newly restored porch swing, the same one where my grandfather had told me this house would be my foundation. I looked out at the maple trees, their leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold. I had not only protected my inheritance, I had honored it. I had fought for it not with anger, but with intelligence and resolve. They had tried to knock me down on the courthouse steps, to reduce me to a filthy animal. But in the end, I was the one who had taken the judge's seat, not through power, but through truth. I had built a new life on the foundation he left me, one that was stronger, more resilient, and entirely my own.